My hands trembled as I adjusted my black uniform for the third time, smoothing the crisp fabric over my nervous stomach. The reflection staring back at me from the staff bathroom mirror looked professional enough, but I could see the anxiety flickering behind my eyes. Tonight wasn't just another shift at Meridian Heights Country Club. Tonight was the night that could change everything, and I had no idea how prophetic that thought would prove to be. My name is Celestine Thorne, and at 28, I'd been working as a waitress for nearly 6 years. Not exactly the career path I'd envisioned when I graduated with a degree in business administration, but life has a way of derailing even the most carefully laid plans. The student loans that had seemed manageable in college became crushing mountains of debt in the real world, especially when combined with my mother's mounting medical bills and my younger brother's struggle with addiction. Every dollar I earned went toward keeping our small family afloat, leaving little room for the luxury of career advancement or personal dreams. Meridian Heights was the kind of establishment where the wealthy came to conduct business away from prying eyes, where deals worth more than most people's annual salaries were discussed over expertly prepared meals and vintage wines. The club's exclusivity was legendary, its membership roster reading like a who's who of political and financial elite. Working there meant excellent tips, but it also meant invisibility. We were expected to serve with silent efficiency, to hear everything and remember nothing, to blend into the opulent background like expensive wallpaper. I'd been specifically requested for tonight's dinner, which had surprised me. The request had come through Madame Evangeline Rosworth, the club's general manager, a woman whose perfectly coiffed silver hair and penetrating blue eyes missed nothing. She'd pulled me aside 3 days ago, her voice low and serious as she explained the importance of the evening's event. "Miss Thorne," she'd said, her crisp British accent adding gravity to every word, "Mr. Draven Ashworth will be hosting a private dinner tomorrow evening. This is not a typical social gathering. There will be significant business conducted, documents signed, fortunes made, or lost. You've been specifically chosen for your discretion and professionalism. I trust you understand the delicacy of the situation, Draven Ashworth." Even his name carried weight in certain circles. At 45, he was one of the youngest billionaires in the country, having built his empire through a combination of technological innovation and ruthless business acumen. His company, Ashworth Industries, had tentacles reaching into everything from renewable energy to artificial intelligence. The man himself was something of an enigma, rarely giving interviews and maintaining a carefully controlled public image. What I knew about him came mainly from financial magazines and whispered conversations among the club's staff, who spoke of him with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The request from me specifically had been flattering but puzzling. I wasn't the most senior waitress on staff, though I prided myself on my attention to detail and my ability to anticipate needs before they were voiced. Perhaps someone had noticed these qualities, or perhaps it was simply a matter of being in the right place at the right time. Either way, I couldn't afford to question good fortune when it presented itself. The dinner was scheduled for 8 o'clock in the club's most exclusive private dining room, the Pemberton Suite. Named after the club's founder, it was a study in understated luxury, with rich mahogany paneling, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the meticulously maintained gardens. The room had witnessed countless power lunches and clandestine meetings over the decades, its walls practically humming with the weight of secrets and deals conducted within its confines. As I made my final preparations, I ran through the evening's details one more time. The guest list was small but significant. Besides Mr. Ashworth, there would be Senator Thaddeus Wainwright, a man whose political influence was matched only by his personal wealth, and Cordelia Blackthorne, CEO of Blackthorne Financial Group, one of the largest investment firms on the East Coast. The fourth guest was Dr. Marcus Ravencrest, though his role in the evening's proceedings remained unclear to me. From what I'd overheard, he was some kind of research scientist, but his presence at what appeared to be a financial gathering seemed unusual. The menu had been carefully curated to impress. We would begin with champagne and canapes, followed by a first course of pan-seared foie gras with fig compote, then lobster bisque, followed by dry-aged beef tenderloin with truffle risotto, and concluding with a decadent chocolate soufflé with gold leaf garnish. The wine pairings alone cost more than I made in a month, each bottle selected from the club's legendary cellar. But it wasn't the food or wine that had everyone on edge. It was the whispered rumors about what would be signed tonight. $30 million. The number had been mentioned in hushed tones by the club's sommelier, who'd overheard Madame Rosworth discussing wine selections with the head chef. $30 million changing hands over dinner as casually as most people might split a restaurant check. I checked my watch. 7:30. Time to head to the Pemberton suite and begin the final preparations. The other staff members assigned to the evening were already there, working with military precision to ensure everything was perfect. The head chef, a temperamental Frenchman named François Beaumont, was putting the finishing touches on the canapes, his movements swift and sure despite his obvious nervousness. Even he seemed affected by the magnitude of tonight's gathering. The dining room looked spectacular when I entered. The table had been set with the club's finest china, each piece positioned with mathematical precision. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandeliers, throwing tiny rainbows across the cream-colored tablecloth. Fresh orchids had been arranged as centerpieces, their exotic beauty adding an air of sophistication to the already elegant setting. Everything was perfect, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous was about to unfold. At 7:55, Madame Rosworth appeared, her eagle eyes scanning every detail. One final time, she nodded approvingly at the setup, then turned her attention to the staff. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority of decades in hospitality management, "tonight's guests are among the most influential people in the country. You will serve with absolute discretion. You will not speak unless spoken to directly. You will not linger unnecessarily near the table during their discussions, and under no circumstances will you repeat anything you hear tonight. Is that understood?" We nodded in unison, though I noticed the slight tremor in one of the younger servers' hands as she arranged the silverware for the third time. The pressure was palpable, the weight of expectation hanging over us like a storm cloud ready to burst. At precisely 8 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. Senator Wainwright entered first, his silver hair impeccably styled and his custom-tailored suit speaking to his substantial wealth and position. He was a man who commanded attention without effort, his presence filling the room even before he spoke. Behind him came Dr. Ravencrest, a surprisingly young man with intense dark eyes and an air of barely contained energy. His handshake with the senator was brief but cordial, suggesting they were acquainted but not particularly close. Cordelia Blackthorne arrived moments later, and I found myself momentarily transfixed by her presence. She was perhaps 50, with auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon, and wearing a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than my annual salary. But it was her eyes that captured my attention, sharp and calculating, the eyes of someone accustomed to evaluating risks and opportunities with surgical precision. She moved through the room like a predator, comfortable in her power and seemingly aware of every detail around her. And then Draven Ashworth himself entered, and the atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. He was taller than I'd expected, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples, and the kind of presence that suggested he was accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room. His suit was perfectly tailored, his movements economical and purposeful. When his eyes swept the room, I felt as though he was cataloging every detail, every person, every potential variable that might affect his evening. The introductions were brief but warm, the kind of greetings exchanged between people who knew each other professionally, but were still feeling out the boundaries of tonight's particular negotiation. I served the champagne with practiced invisibility, filling glasses and offering canapés while trying to remain as unobtrusive as possible. The conversation during the first course was general, touching on politics, the economy, and mutual acquaintances, but I could sense the underlying tension, the awareness that more serious matters lay ahead. It was during the second course that the real business began. Dr. Ravencrest was explaining something about his research, his voice passionate, despite his obvious attempt to maintain professional composure. "The applications are revolutionary," he was saying, leaning forward slightly as he spoke. "We're not just talking about incremental improvements in energy efficiency. This technology could fundamentally change how we think about power generation and storage." Senator Wainwright set down his spoon, his expression thoughtful. "The environmental implications alone would be staggering. If your projections are accurate, we could be looking at carbon neutrality within a decade, possibly less." Ashworth's response was measured, his businessman's instincts clearly evaluating every angle. "The potential is certainly there, Marcus, but we need to be realistic about the challenges. Scaling up from laboratory prototypes to commercial applications isn't just a matter of throwing money at the problem." Cordelia had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions worth hundreds of millions. "The financial projections look sound, assuming the technology performs as described. My firm has run extensive models, and the return on investment could be extraordinary." As I refilled their wine glasses, I found myself inadvertently listening more intently than I should have. The conversation was fascinating, touching on subjects far removed from my daily concerns, but compelling nonetheless. They were discussing something called fusion catalyst technology, though the details were largely beyond my understanding. What was clear was that Dr. Ravencrest had developed something potentially revolutionary, and the others were considering investing in its commercialization. The third course brought more specific discussions about implementation timelines and regulatory hurdles. Senator Wainwright's role became clearer, As they talked about environmental legislation and government incentives, his political influence would be crucial in navigating the complex web of regulations surrounding new energy technologies. The conversation was sophisticated and nuanced, revealing depths of knowledge and strategic thinking that reminded me just how far removed my world was from theirs. It was during the main course that Ashworth finally broached the subject everyone had been dancing around. "I think we've all done our homework," he said, cutting into his beef with surgical precision. "The question now is whether we're ready to move forward. Marcus, your technology represents a genuine breakthrough. Senator, your support could accelerate regulatory approval by years. Cordelia, your financial backing would provide the stability we need for large-scale implementation." Dr. Ravencrest nodded eagerly, though I noticed his hands were slightly unsteady as he reached for his wine glass. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. This technology works. I've seen it work. The laboratory results are beyond question. "And the real-world applications?" Cordelia asked, her tone suggesting she'd been burned by laboratory promises before. 6 months of field testing have confirmed our projections," Ravencrest replied. "The efficiency gains are consistent across multiple environments and conditions. We're not dealing with theoretical possibilities anymore. This is proven technology ready for commercialization." Senator Wainwright leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "The timing is certainly fortuitous. With the current administration's focus on clean energy initiatives, we could see unprecedented government support for this kind of innovation." As they talked, I began to understand the magnitude of what was being discussed. This wasn't just a business deal, it was potentially the foundation of an entirely new industry. The environmental implications alone were staggering, but the financial opportunities were equally remarkable. $30 million was apparently just the initial investment, with the potential for returns in the billions if the technology proved as revolutionary as Dr. Ravencrest claimed. The conversation continued through dessert, becoming increasingly specific about implementation details and profit-sharing arrangements. I learned that Ashworth would be the primary investor, providing the bulk of the $30 million in exchange for controlling interest in the new venture. Senator Wainwright would provide political support and regulatory guidance in exchange for a smaller stake and the promise of being involved in the technology's eventual government applications. Cordelia's firm would handle the financial structuring and help secure additional funding as needed. As I served coffee and cognac, I noticed that briefcases had appeared beside several of the chairs. The evening was clearly approaching its climax, the moment when all their careful negotiations would be formalized into legal agreements. The tension in the room was palpable, though it was the electric tension of anticipation rather than conflict. Everyone seemed satisfied with the arrangements they'd negotiated. Ashworth opened his briefcase first, withdrawing a thick folder of documents. "I've had my legal team prepare the partnership agreements," he announced, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to closing major deals. "Everything we've discussed is reflected in these contracts, including the specific terms we negotiated regarding intellectual property rights and profit distribution." Dr. Ravencrest accepted his copy of the documents with hands that shook slightly with excitement or nervousness. Senator Wainwright and Cordelia also received their sets, each immediately beginning to review the contents with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to complex legal documents. As they read, I continued my duties, refilling coffee cups and ensuring their cognac glasses remained appropriately filled. The room had fallen into a concentrated silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of paper and the soft clink of china. I found myself moving more quietly than usual, aware that I was witnessing something significant, a moment that might be remembered decades from now as the beginning of a new era in energy technology. It was as I was refilling Dr. Ravencrest's coffee cup that I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The document in front of him was open to a page detailing the financial arrangements, and there, in black and white, was a number that didn't match what they had been discussing all evening. The contract specified $13 million as Ashworth's initial investment, not $30 million. I nearly dropped the coffee pot, my hands suddenly unsteady as the implications hit me. This wasn't a simple typo or clerical error. 13 million versus 30 million was a difference that could affect the entire structure of their agreement, the profit-sharing arrangements, the control mechanisms, everything they'd spent hours negotiating. My mind raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. Had Dr. Ravencrest noticed the discrepancy? Was he aware that the contract he was about to sign specified less than half the investment amount they'd agreed upon? Or was this some kind of deliberate deception, a last-minute attempt by Ashworth to reduce his financial exposure while maintaining the same level of control? I glanced around the table, trying to gauge whether anyone else had noticed the error. Ashworth was reviewing his own copy with apparent satisfaction, occasionally nodding as he read specific clauses. Senator Wainwright seemed focused on the sections dealing with regulatory compliance and government oversight. Cordelia was making notes in the margins of her copy, her expression suggesting she was satisfied with the financial terms as written. Only Dr. Ravencrest seemed potentially unaware of the discrepancy, his excitement apparently overwhelming his attention to specific financial details. He was skimming through the document quickly, nodding eagerly as he read, clearly anxious to formalize the agreement that would fund his revolutionary technology. The weight of what I knew settled on my shoulders like a crushing burden. Here I was, a waitress who made barely enough to cover her family's basic needs, privy to information that could affect a deal worth millions of dollars. The moral implications were staggering. If I remained silent, Dr. Ravencrest might sign an agreement that would cost him $17 million. If I spoke up, I could be destroying my career, my livelihood, everything I'd worked to build. But even as these thoughts raced through my mind, I couldn't ignore the fundamental question of right and wrong. Dr. Ravencrest deserved to know what he was signing. He deserved to make an informed decision about his revolutionary technology and its commercialization. The fact that I was supposedly invisible, that I wasn't supposed to be listening or caring about their business, didn't change the basic ethical reality of the situation. As I continued moving around the table, performing my duties with automatic precision while my mind churned with indecision, I tried to consider all the possible angles. Maybe the 13 million figure was correct, and they'd been discussing total funding that would come from multiple sources. Maybe Ashworth's 30 million commitment was spread across several phases of development, with only 13 million due initially. Maybe I'd misunderstood their earlier conversation, focused too much on one specific number while missing crucial context. But even as I grasped for these explanations, I knew they weren't sufficient. The contract was clear about being an initial partnership agreement for commercialization of Dr. Ravencrest's technology. There was no mention of phased funding or additional investment tranches. The 13 million figure appeared to be the total amount Ashworth was committing to invest. Period. I watched Dr. Ravencrest continue reading, his excitement palpable as he reviewed what he believed were the terms they'd agreed upon. His entire demeanor suggested a man on the verge of realizing his greatest professional dream, finally seeing his years of research and development validated through substantial financial backing. The thought of him unknowingly signing away $17 million made my stomach clench with anxiety. The other guests were nearing the end of their document review, and I could sense the evening approaching its critical moment. Soon they would be ready to sign, to formalize their agreement, and launch what could become one of the most significant technological ventures of the decade. And I would have to live with whatever choice I made in the next few minutes. My hands continued their practiced motions, clearing dessert plates and refreshing drinks, while my mind wrestled with the implications of each possible course of action. If I remained silent, I would be complicit in what might be fraud or, at minimum, a devastating oversight that could ruin Dr. Ravencrest financially. If I spoke up, I would be violating every expectation of my position, potentially destroying not just my own career, but embarrassing everyone at the table, and possibly derailing a deal that could have tremendous benefits for society. The silence in the room was becoming more pronounced as each guest finished their review. I could see Ashworth glancing around the table, gauging the readiness of the others to proceed. Senator Wainwright closed his copy of the contract and reached for his fountain pen, an ornate gold instrument that probably cost more than I made in a week. Cordelia was reviewing the signature pages, preparing to add her name to the agreement. Dr. Ravencrest was still reading, but he was clearly near the end, his finger tracing along the final paragraphs of legal text. Soon, he too would be ready to sign, unaware that he was about to commit his revolutionary technology to a partnership that offered him far less financial backing than he believed he was receiving. The weight of the moment pressed down on me with almost physical force. Here I was, a working-class woman whose biggest previous moral dilemma had been whether to report a coworker who was occasionally late, suddenly faced with a decision that could affect millions of dollars and potentially revolutionary technology. The disparity between my usual concerns and the magnitude of what I was witnessing felt almost surreal. I thought about my mother, lying in her hospital bed, fighting cancer with treatments we could barely afford. I thought about my brother, struggling with addiction and needing expensive rehabilitation we couldn't provide. I thought about my own dreams, deferred year after year as financial necessities took precedence over personal ambitions. This job at Meridian Heights was the best opportunity I'd ever had, the foundation upon which I was trying to build a more stable future for my family and myself. But I also thought about Dr. Ravencrest, whose passionate description of his technology had revealed a man genuinely committed to making the world better. His fusion catalyst system could revolutionize energy production, potentially solving climate change and creating unprecedented prosperity. Did such a man deserve to be deceived, even inadvertently, about the terms of the agreement that would determine his technology's future. The moral calculus was complicated by my uncertainty about intent. Was this a deliberate deception by Ashworth, or simply a clerical error that would be caught and corrected during the signing process? If it was fraud, then my silence would make me complicit in a crime. If it was an honest mistake, then my intervention might be unnecessary, even counterproductive, potentially embarrassing everyone involved over a simple typo. As I moved around the table one more time, ostensibly checking that everyone had everything they needed, I found myself studying each face, trying to read their intentions and level of awareness. Ashworth's expression was unreadable, the poker face of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. He could have been aware of the discrepancy and counting on Dr. Ravencrest's excitement to blind him to the details, or he could have been as unaware as everyone else. Senator Wainwright seemed genuinely pleased with the agreement, his political instincts clearly telling him that association with breakthrough technology would be beneficial to his career. Cordelia appeared satisfied with the financial terms, though her focus seemed to be more on the deal structure than the specific investment amounts. And Dr. Ravencrest continued reading with the enthusiasm of someone who believed his dreams were about to come true. The moment was approaching when I would have to choose. In a few minutes, pens would touch paper, signatures would be applied, and a $30 million agreement would become legally binding at $13 million, unless someone intervened. The question was whether that someone should be me, a waitress whose only qualification for this decision was having been in the right place at the wrong time to notice a potentially critical error. The professional part of my mind screamed warnings about the consequences of speaking up. I could be fired immediately, blacklisted from working at any comparable establishment, possibly even sued if my intervention somehow damaged the deal or embarrassed the participants. My family's financial stability, already precarious, could be destroyed completely. The years I'd spent building my reputation for discretion and professionalism could be undone in a single moment of moral intervention. But the human part of my mind couldn't ignore the fundamental wrongness of allowing someone to be deceived, regardless of the personal cost to me. Dr. Ravencrest had spent years developing his technology, had put his career and probably his personal finances on the line to bring it to this moment. He deserved to know exactly what he was agreeing to, deserved to make an informed decision about his life's work. As I stood there, coffee pot in hand, watching four of the most powerful people I'd ever encountered prepare to formalize an agreement that could change the world, I realized that my next few seconds would define not just their futures, but my own sense of who I was as a person. The choice before me wasn't just about money or careers or technology. It was about the kind of person I wanted to be, the kind of life I wanted to live, the kind of legacy I wanted to leave. The silence in the room was profound now, broken only by the soft sound of pages turning and the occasional clink of crystal as someone reached for their drink. Everyone was ready. The moment had arrived. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settling into my bones like winter cold. Whatever happened next would change everything, and there was no going back. The coffee pot trembled slightly in my hands as I stepped forward, knowing that my next words would either save my job and my family's security, or destroy them completely in service of a principle I wasn't even sure I fully understood. The only sound in the room was my own heartbeat thundering in my ears as I opened my mouth to speak or stay silent, to intervene, or let events unfold as they would. $30 million hung in the balance, along with revolutionary technology, powerful careers, and my own uncertain future. The choice was mine, and time had run out for deliberation. Whatever I did next would have to live with forever, and I could feel the weight of that responsibility settling over me like a shroud as I prepared to act on the decision that would define everything that came after. "Excuse me," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying clearly through the hushed atmosphere of the dining room. "I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but I believe there may be an error in the documentation." The effect was immediate and electric. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from surprise to outright shock. In the rarefied world of Meridian Heights, staff members simply didn't interrupt private business meetings, regardless of the circumstances. The breach of protocol was so unprecedented that for a moment nobody seemed to know how to respond. Ashworth was the first to recover, his businessman's instincts kicking in as he assessed this unexpected variable. His dark eyes fixed on me with laser-like intensity, and I felt my courage wavering under his scrutiny. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" His tone was carefully controlled, but I could detect an undercurrent of displeasure that made my stomach clench with anxiety. My mouth had gone completely dry, but I forced myself to continue. "The contract that Dr. Ravencrest is reviewing, sir. The investment amount appears to be listed as $13 million, but throughout dinner, you've been discussing $30 million. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set down the coffee pot to avoid dropping it. The silence that followed my words was deafening. Dr. Ravencrest immediately looked down at his contract, his finger racing across the pages until he found the financial sections. Senator Wainwright leaned forward with obvious interest, while Cordelia's sharp eyes moved between me and the documents with calculating precision. "Dear God," Dr. Ravencrest breathed, his face going pale as he located the discrepancy. "She's absolutely right. This says 13 million, not 30. Ashworth's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The only outward sign of what I suspected was significant internal turmoil. He reached for his own copy of the contract, though something in his expression suggested he already knew what he would find. "There must be some mistake," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Cordelia had already pulled out her copy and was scanning the relevant sections with professional efficiency. "The error appears consistent across all copies," she announced, her voice crisp and businesslike. "Every reference to the initial investment specifies $13 million. Senator Wainwright set down his cognac glass with a sharp clink. "How does such a significant discrepancy occur? We've spent hours discussing specific terms, and now we discover the documentation doesn't reflect our negotiations?" The tension in the room was palpable, and I realized I had just inserted myself into the middle of a situation that could have massive ramifications for everyone involved. Part of me wanted to retreat, to apologize for the interruption and return to my invisible role, but it was too late for that now. The damage, if it could be called that, was already done. Dr. Ravencrest was studying his contract with obvious distress, his earlier excitement replaced by confusion and growing concern. "This changes everything," he said, his voice tight with emotion. The entire profit-sharing arrangement was based on a $30 million investment. At $13 million, the percentages don't work the same way. Ashworth finally looked up from his documents, his expression unreadable. Marcus, I assure you, this was not intentional. My legal team must have made an error in transcription. The commitment we discussed remains the same. But something in his tone made me suspicious, a slight hesitation that suggested the explanation wasn't entirely truthful. I found myself studying his face, trying to read the micro-expressions that might reveal his true thoughts. Had this been a deliberate attempt at deception, counting on Dr. Ravencrest's excitement to blind him to the details? Or was it genuinely an oversight by his legal team? Senator Wainwright was clearly having similar thoughts. His political instincts, honed by decades of navigating complex negotiations, were obviously alert to the possibility of deliberate manipulation. "Draven," he said carefully, "this kind of error seems unusual for a legal team of your caliber. Perhaps we should postpone the signing until corrected documents can be prepared." The suggestion hung in the air like an accusation, though it was delivered with diplomatic politeness. I could see Ashworth calculating rapidly, weighing his options as the carefully orchestrated evening threatened to unravel completely. Cordelia broke the uncomfortable silence. "I think postponement might be wise regardless of intent. This level of discrepancy raises questions about the thoroughness of the document preparation. We should all have our legal teams review everything again before proceeding." Dr. Ravencrest nodded slowly, though his disappointment was obvious. "I suppose you're right. I was so excited to finally move forward that I might have rushed through the details." He looked up at me with something approaching gratitude. "Thank you for noticing what I missed. This could have been a costly oversight." The acknowledgement hit me with unexpected force. Here was a brilliant scientist, a man whose work could potentially change the world, thanking me for protecting his interests. The validation was overwhelming, even as I remained terrified about the professional consequences of my intervention. Ashworth closed his copy of the contract with deliberate precision. "Of course, we'll correct the documentation and reconvene when everyone has had adequate time for review. Marcus, your technology deserves nothing less than perfect attention to detail." There was something in his tone that bothered me, a smoothness that felt rehearsed rather than genuine. I found myself wondering if this had been his plan all along, to present documents with reduced terms and hope they wouldn't be noticed until after signing. The thought made me angry on Dr. Ravencrest's behalf, though I knew I had no proof of deliberate deception. As the guests began gathering their belongings and preparing to leave, I realized the immediate crisis had passed, but my personal situation remained precarious. I had violated every expectation of my position, inserted myself into confidential business negotiations, and potentially embarrassed some of the most powerful people in the region. The fact that I had been right about the discrepancy might not be enough to save my job. Senator Wainwright was the first to leave, shaking hands with the others and expressing his hope that the corrected documents would reflect their original discussions. Dr. Ravencrest followed, pausing to speak with me briefly as he passed. "I don't know your name," he said quietly, "but I want you to know how much I appreciate what you did tonight. My technology represents years of work and significant personal investment. You may have saved me from a very costly mistake. His genuine gratitude was both touching and terrifying. "I'm just glad I could help, sir," I managed to say, though my voice was barely steady. Cordelia overheard this exchange and approached us. "Young lady, what you did took considerable courage. In my experience, most people would have stayed silent to avoid complications." She handed me her business card. "If you ever find yourself looking for new opportunities, please don't hesitate to contact me." The gesture was unexpected and generous, though I suspected it might prove academic if I was about to be fired for my actions tonight. Still, I tucked the card into my uniform pocket with trembling fingers. That left only Ashworth, who had been watching these interactions with obvious interest. As the others departed, he turned his full attention to me, and I felt like a mouse being studied by a particularly intelligent cat. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice carrying that same measured tone he'd used throughout dinner. "Celestine Thorne, sir," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. He nodded slowly, as if filing the information away for future reference. "Miss Thorne, you've had quite an impact on tonight's proceedings. I'm curious about your background. Most servers wouldn't have the knowledge or confidence to interrupt a business meeting over contract details." The question felt loaded with implications I couldn't fully decipher. "I have a degree in business administration, sir." I noticed the discrepancy and felt it was important enough to mention. "Important enough to risk your position here," he observed. "That suggests either remarkable integrity or remarkable naivety. I'm not sure which." His words carried a subtle threat that made my blood run cold. This was a man accustomed to controlling situations and people, and my intervention had disrupted his carefully planned evening. I had no doubt he possessed the influence to end my career at Meridian Heights with a single phone call. "I simply felt Dr. Ravencrest deserved to know what he was signing," I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. Ashworth studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Integrity can be an expensive luxury, Miss Thorne. I hope you're prepared for the potential cost." With that ominous observation, he gathered his documents and left, leaving me alone in the elegant dining room with the remnants of the disrupted evening scattered around me. My hands were still shaking as I began clearing the table, mechanically performing the familiar tasks while my mind raced through the possible consequences of my actions. Madame Rosworth appeared within minutes, her expression thunderous as she surveyed the scene. "Miss Thorne, my office, immediately." Her crisp British accent had taken on an edge that could have cut glass. I followed her through the club's corridors, past oil paintings of long-dead members and crystal chandeliers that had witnessed decades of similar dramas. Her office was a reflection of her personality, precisely organized and intimidating in its formal elegance. She gestured for me to sit in the chair facing her mahogany desk, then took her own seat with the deliberate movements of someone preparing for an unpleasant but necessary task. "Explain yourself," she said without preamble. 23 years I've been managing this establishment, and never, not once, has a member of my staff interrupted a private business meeting to comment on confidential documents. I had been dreading this conversation, but now that it was happening, I found a strange calm settling over me. There was an error in the contract that could have cost Dr. Ravencrest $17 million. I felt he deserved to know. "You felt," she repeated, her tone making it clear what she thought of my feelings being relevant to the situation. Miss Thorne, your job is to serve food and beverages with discretion. Your job is emphatically not to provide legal or financial advice to our members." "I understand that, Madame Rosworth, but I couldn't stand by and watch someone be deceived, even inadvertently." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with the same intensity Ashworth had displayed. "Deceived? That's a serious accusation. Are you suggesting that Mr. Ashworth deliberately misrepresented the terms of his agreement?" The question was a trap, and I recognized it as such. Accusing Ashworth of fraud would be career suicide, but claiming it was an innocent mistake might make my intervention seem unnecessary and presumptuous. "I don't know his intentions," I said carefully. "I only know what I observed." "What you observed was confidential business information that you had no right to act upon," she replied sharply. "The fact that you may have been correct about a discrepancy doesn't excuse the fundamental breach of protocol." I nodded, accepting the validity of her point while still believing I had made the right choice. I understand the seriousness of what I did, but if the situation arose again, I would make the same decision. My honesty seemed to surprise her, though she quickly masked her reaction behind professional composure. "Miss Thorne, I have 3 phone calls waiting for me. One from Senator Wainwright's office, one from Miss Blackthorne's assistant, and one from Mr. Ashworth himself. Do you suppose any of these calls will be complimentary about tonight's service?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I had been so focused on the moral implications of my decision that I hadn't fully considered how it would reflect on the club itself. Meridian Heights prided itself on discretion and seamless service, and I had shattered both with my intervention. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I never intended to embarrass the club or reflect poorly on your management." "Intentions matter less than results, Miss Thorne. The reality is that you've created a situation that requires damage control, and damage control in an establishment like this is both delicate and expensive." She opened a file drawer and withdrew what I recognized as my personnel folder. The sight of it made my stomach clench with dread, as it could only mean she was preparing to document my termination. "You've been an exemplary employee until tonight," she continued, scanning the contents of my file. "Punctual, professional, discreet. Several members have complimented your service over the years. That's the only reason we're having this conversation instead of security escorting you from the premises." A tiny spark of hope flickered in my chest, though I tried not to let it grow too large. If she was considering my previous record, perhaps my position wasn't entirely hopeless. "However," she continued, "the precedent of staff members involving themselves in member business cannot be tolerated. If word spreads that our servers are listening to confidential conversations and acting on what they hear, it could destroy the trust that is fundamental to our operations." The hope died as quickly as it had emerged. She was right, of course. Meridian Heights existed because powerful people believed they could conduct sensitive business without worrying about interference from the staff. My actions tonight had violated that basic assumption. "I understand," I said, though the words felt like admitting defeat. "When would you like me to clear out my locker?" Madame Rosworth raised an eyebrow at my question. "Miss Thorne, I haven't said anything about termination, though I admit the temptation is considerable." My confusion must have been obvious because she continued with something that might have been amusement. "3 phone calls, Miss Thorne. Senator Wainwright's office called to commend your professionalism and attention to detail. Miss Blackthorn's assistant called to inquire about your availability for private events, and Mr. Ashworth called to discuss your future employment prospects. The room seemed to spin around me as I tried to process this unexpected information. I don't understand. Neither did I initially. It seems your intervention, while highly irregular, has been perceived by some as evidence of exceptional integrity and competence. Senator Wainwright was particularly impressed that you risked your position to protect Dr. Ravencrest's interests. I stared at her in disbelief, unable to reconcile this news with my expectations of disaster and unemployment. But Mr. Ashworth seemed very displeased. Mr. Ashworth is a complex man who appreciates complex situations. His call was perhaps the most interesting of the three. She paused, clearly enjoying my confusion. He's offered you a position with his company, executive assistant to his chief financial officer, with a starting salary that's triple what you earn here. The offer was so unexpected, so far beyond anything I could have imagined, that I wondered if I was hallucinating from stress. He wants to hire me after I disrupted his deal? Because you disrupted his deal, she corrected. According to Mr. Ashworth, anyone with the intelligence to spot a $17 million discrepancy and the integrity to risk their career pointing it out is exactly the kind of person he wants on his team. My mind was reeling, trying to process the complete reversal of what I had expected to be the worst night of my professional life. But the contract error, the embarrassment, was apparently a test, Madame Rosworth said with a slight smile. Mr. Ashworth has been evaluating Dr. Ravencrest's attention to detail and business acumen as part of his investment decision. He deliberately introduced the discrepancy to see if it would be caught before signing. He expected Dr. Ravencrest to notice it, but when that didn't happen, your intervention became even more valuable data. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The entire evening had been orchestrated, the contract error deliberate, my moral crisis manufactured as part of someone else's business strategy. I felt simultaneously relieved that I hadn't prevented a legitimate deal and furious that I had been unknowingly manipulated. So, Dr. Ravencrest was never really at risk of losing $17 million, I said, anger creeping into my voice. On the contrary, he was at significant risk. If he had signed the contract without noticing the error, Mr. Ashworth would have honored the reduced terms as written. Your intervention saved Dr. Ravencrest from exactly the financial loss you were trying to prevent. The complexity of the situation was staggering. Ashworth had created a scenario where Dr. Ravencrest's carelessness would have cost him millions, but my vigilance had prevented that outcome. The test had multiple layers, evaluating not just the scientist's business acumen, but also revealing my own character and capabilities. What about Dr. Ravencrest? Does he know it was intentional? Not yet. That revelation will be part of Mr. Ashworth's evaluation of how to proceed with a partnership. Your intervention has actually strengthened Dr. Ravencrest's position, as it demonstrates he has allies watching out for his interests. I sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the implications of everything I had learned. My career at Meridian Heights wasn't ending in disgrace. Instead, I was being offered opportunities I had never dared to imagine. The moral crisis that had tormented me all evening had been engineered, but my response to it had been authentic and had apparently impressed people whose good opinion could change my life. "What happens now?" I asked, though I was afraid to hope too much. "That depends on you, Miss Thorne. Mr. Ashworth's offer is genuine and immediate. Miss Blackthorne has also expressed interest in discussing opportunities with her firm. And of course, your position here remains secure if you prefer to stay." The choices spread before me like paths in a forest, each leading to a different future than the one I had imagined when I woke up this morning. The scared, financially struggling waitress who had served dinner tonight was being offered the chance to become someone entirely different, though I wasn't sure I trusted the transformation. "I need time to think," I said finally. "Of course, though I should mention that Mr. Ashworth's offer includes immediate health insurance coverage and a signing bonus sufficient to address any current financial obligations you might have." The reference to financial obligations was subtle, but pointed. Somehow, Ashworth had learned about my mother's medical bills and my family's situation. The offer wasn't just about my professional qualifications. It was about providing me with the resources to solve the problems that had driven me to work multiple jobs and sacrifice my own ambitions. I left Madame Rosworth's office in a daze, my mind spinning with possibilities and questions. The elegant corridors of Meridian Heights seemed different now, less like the boundaries of my world and more like a stepping stone to something larger. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being manipulated, that my genuine moral crisis had been exploited for someone else's purposes. The next morning brought clarity along with my usual pre-dawn alarm as I sat in my small apartment, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over a city where billionaires tested waitresses and million-dollar deals hung on moral decisions. I realized that the manipulation didn't diminish the authenticity of my choice. I had acted according to my principles without knowing the broader context or potential rewards. The fact that my integrity had been part of someone else's test didn't make it less real. I called Ashworth Industries at exactly 9 o'clock. His secretary put me through immediately, as though my call had been expected. "Miss Thorne?" His familiar voice came through the phone, carrying the same measured confidence I remembered from the previous evening. "I trust you've had time to consider our discussion." "I have some questions," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "I would be disappointed if you didn't. Shall we meet for lunch? I believe we have quite a bit to discuss." The restaurant he chose was elegant, but not ostentatious, the kind of place where serious conversations could happen without the theatrical grandeur of Meridian Heights. Ashworth arrived precisely on time, wearing a different suit but the same aura of controlled power that seemed to define him. "You're angry about the test," he observed without preamble as we were seated. His directness caught me off guard, though I appreciated it more than diplomatic dancing around the issue. "I don't like being manipulated." "Neither do I," he replied, "which is why I test people before trusting them with significant responsibilities. Last night revealed more about your character than a dozen interviews could have provided. And if I had stayed silent, if I had chosen to protect my job instead of speaking up, then Dr. Ravencrest would have learned an expensive lesson about reading contracts carefully, and you would have continued serving dinners at Meridian Heights. Both outcomes would have provided valuable information." His casualness about the potential $17 million cost to Dr. Ravencrest bothered me. That seems rather callous. Business often is, he acknowledged, but consider the alternative. If Marcus can't protect himself from obvious contract discrepancies, how can I trust him to manage the complexities of bringing revolutionary technology to market? Better to discover his limitations now than after I've invested hundreds of millions in scaling up his work. The logic was sound, even if I found the methods distasteful. And what did you learn about him? That he needs someone like you watching his back. His scientific brilliance is unquestionable, but his business instincts require development. Your intervention suggests he has good people around him, which partially mitigates the risk. I studied his face, trying to read the calculations behind his measured words. So the deal will go forward? At $30 million, with additional protections and oversight that weren't in the original structure. Your intervention didn't just save Marcus money, it improved the entire partnership framework. The revelation was gratifying, though I couldn't shake my discomfort with having been an unwitting part of his elaborate test. What makes you think I'd want to work for someone who manipulates people? Because you understand that business at this level requires careful evaluation of human factors, not just financial ones. The manipulation, as you call it, revealed truth rather than creating deception. That's a distinction worth considering. He was right, though I wasn't ready to admit it entirely. The job offer is real. Entirely real. Though I should clarify that it's not charity motivated by your family's financial situation. It's a business decision based on demonstrated capabilities that are rare and valuable. The reference to my family's circumstances was unsettling. How much do you know about my personal situation? Enough to understand that you've been making significant sacrifices to support people you care about. That kind of loyalty and responsibility is precisely what I look for in key employees. His matter-of-fact tone suggested that investigating potential employees was routine for him, though the thoroughness was still unnerving. What exactly would this position involve? Working with my chief financial officer to evaluate potential investments and partnerships. Your combination of financial knowledge and ability to notice crucial details would be invaluable in due diligence processes. You'd be helping to prevent exactly the kind of costly oversights that your intervention identified last night. The job description was far beyond anything I had imagined for myself, representing not just financial security, but genuine professional opportunity. The salary you mentioned is 3 times your current annual income, with health benefits that would cover your mother's treatments completely, and performance bonuses that could double your base compensation. I don't make offers lightly, Miss Thorne. The numbers were staggering, representing a complete transformation of my family's situation. My mother could get the best possible care, my brother could afford rehabilitation, and I could finally pursue the career I had always wanted. But the magnitude of the opportunity also made me cautious. Why me? I asked. Surely you have access to candidates with more experience and better credentials. Experience can be taught. Credentials can be purchased. Integrity under pressure is much rarer and far more valuable. What you did last night demonstrated judgment and character that can't be developed through training programs. His explanation was flattering, but I sensed there were other factors he wasn't mentioning. There's something else, isn't there? He smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I had seen from him. You're perceptive. Yes, there's something else. I've built my company by surrounding myself with people who will tell me uncomfortable truths when necessary. Last night proved you're willing to risk personal consequences to point out potential problems. That's exactly the kind of advisor I need. The admission revealed more vulnerability than I had expected from someone with his reputation. You want someone who will challenge you. I want someone who will protect me from my own blind spots and overconfidence. Success can be isolating, Miss Thorne. The higher you climb, the fewer people are willing to contradict you. That's dangerous in business and potentially catastrophic in life. His honesty was disarming, revealing a self-awareness that contrasted sharply with his earlier manipulative behavior. I found myself beginning to understand the complexity of his character and the pressures that shaped his approach to relationships and business. I'll need guarantees about job security, I said, testing his commitment to the arrangement. 3-year contract with substantial severance provisions. My legal team will prepare something that protects both our interests. And my family's medical expenses? Covered retroactively from today, regardless of your employment decision. Consider it compensation for last night's consulting services. The gesture was unexpected and generous, removing the immediate financial pressure that had been driving my decision-making process. That's not necessary. It's entirely necessary. You provided value last night, and value deserves compensation. The fact that you weren't officially working for me at the time is irrelevant. As our lunch continued, I found myself warming to him despite my initial reservations. His directness was refreshing after years of navigating the subtle hierarchies and unspoken expectations of service work. He treated me as an equal, someone whose opinions and concerns deserved serious consideration. I have one more question, I said as we prepared to leave. What happens to Dr. Ravencrest now that you know about his business blind spots? He gets the partnership he wanted, with additional support structure to help him develop the skills he needs. Marcus is brilliant, but naive about commercial realities. My job is to help him succeed, not to punish him for areas where he needs development. The answer reassured me that my intervention had genuinely helped Dr. Ravencrest rather than simply exposing him to judgment. And the $30 million will be invested as originally discussed, with additional oversight to ensure it's used effectively. Your actions last night improved the partnership for everyone involved. As I walked back to my apartment, my mind churned with the implications of everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, I'd been a waitress struggling to support my family and wondering if I would ever have the chance to use my education for something meaningful. Now I was being offered opportunities that exceeded my wildest dreams, all because I had chosen to speak up when I witnessed something wrong. The transformation felt surreal, almost too dramatic to be real, but the business card in my pocket and the confirmed coverage of my mother's medical bills proved that it wasn't a fantasy. My life was genuinely changing, and I had the power to choose which direction that change would take. I spent the evening talking with my mother, explaining the situation as best I could without revealing confidential details about the previous night's events. Her pride in my decision to speak up, despite the risks, was obvious, though she worried about the magnitude of the opportunities I was being offered. "It sounds almost too good to be true, sweetheart," she said from her hospital bed, her voice weak but her eyes alert with maternal concern. "Are you sure this man's intentions are honorable?" "I think his intentions are business-focused rather than personal," I replied. "He sees value in my skills and judgment, and he's willing to pay for them. It's not charity, it's an investment in human capital." "And you trust him?" The question went to the heart of my uncertainty. I trust his self-interest. He benefits from having employees who will protect his investments and tell him uncomfortable truths. As long as I continue providing that value, I believe the arrangement will be stable. My mother nodded slowly, her years of experience with difficult decisions evident in her thoughtful expression. "Then perhaps it's time to stop surviving and start living." Her words crystallized something that had been forming in my mind throughout the day. For years, I had been focused entirely on meeting immediate needs, paying bills, managing crises, and keeping my family afloat. The concept of actually building a career, pursuing professional growth, and planning for the future had seemed like luxuries I couldn't afford. But now, suddenly, those luxuries were within reach. I could afford to think beyond next month's rent and my mother's next treatment. I could consider what I wanted to achieve professionally, what kind of person I wanted to become, what legacy I wanted to build. The decision, when it finally came, felt inevitable rather than difficult. I called Ashworth's office the next morning and accepted his offer, with the understanding that my start date would be delayed by 2 weeks to allow for proper transition at Meridian Heights. Madame Rosworth received my resignation with what I suspected was mixed emotions. "I'm disappointed to lose you, Miss Thorne, but not surprised by your decision. This opportunity represents exactly the kind of advancement your skills deserve." "Thank you for everything you've taught me," I said sincerely. "Working here has been invaluable preparation for whatever comes next." Indeed, it has. The skills you've developed in reading people, managing complex situations, and maintaining composure under pressure will serve you well in any environment. My final 2 weeks at Meridian Heights passed in a blur of training my replacement and handling the transition details. Several members made a point of commenting on my departure, expressing appreciation for my service and wishing me well in my new position. The kindness was unexpected and touching, a reminder that even in a world defined by wealth and power, human connections could transcend social boundaries. Dr. Ravencrest appeared for dinner during my final week, making a point of seeking me out during a quiet moment in the evening service. "Miss Thorne, I wanted to thank you again for your intervention the other night. The corrected contracts were signed yesterday, and I'm pleased to report that Mr. Ashworth's partnership has exceeded even my most optimistic expectations." His obvious happiness was gratifying, confirming that my decision had genuinely benefited someone whose work could improve countless lives. "I'm so glad everything worked out well, Dr. Ravencrest." "More than well. The partnership structure he proposed after your intervention is far more comprehensive than what we originally discussed. Your actions didn't just save me money, they led to a much better arrangement overall." The news was better than I had dared hope. My moral crisis had not only resolved correctly, but had actually improved the outcomes for everyone involved. As I cleared out my locker on my final day, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed because of a single moment of moral clarity. The choice to speak up when I witnessed something wrong had seemed agonizing at the time, fraught with professional risk and personal uncertainty. But that choice had revealed character traits I hadn't even known I possessed and had opened doors I had never imagined existed. The young woman who had trembled while serving dinner to billionaires was being replaced by someone with confidence in her own judgment and capabilities. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was profound and accelerating. My first day at Ashworth Industries arrived with a mixture of excitement and terror that felt remarkably similar to my initial anxiety at Meridian Heights. But this time, I was walking into an environment where my intelligence and education would be assets rather than irrelevant qualifications. I was joining a team where my voice would be heard and my opinions valued. As I entered the gleaming office building that would become my new professional home, I thought about the unexpected journey that had brought me here, a career that had begun with necessity and financial desperation had evolved into something with genuine purpose and unlimited potential. The woman who had once felt invisible was about to become someone whose insights could influence decisions worth millions of dollars. The future stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities I was finally free to pursue. My family's financial security was assured, my professional development was beginning, and I had learned that speaking truth to power, while risky, could be the foundation of everything that mattered most. The choice I had made that night at Meridian Heights would continue to define my path forward. But now I understood that it was just the first of many decisions that would shape the person I was becoming. The courage to do what was right, regardless of personal cost, had proven to be the most valuable skill I possessed. Everything else could be learned, but integrity under pressure was the foundation upon which a meaningful life could be built.